Hi, everybody. My name is Cynthia Allen, and I'm with Middle Tennessee State University, and we are going to talk a little bit about the Stones River watershed today, and hopefully share this as part of the Farmers Market Workshop educational series that citizens can use to understand a little bit about the rivers and streams here in Murfreesboro. Just a little background. I'm with, again, MTSU, and I'm part of the Stormwater program, and that's a co-permitted program that MTSU and the city of Murfreesboro partner on to try and protect water quality and reducing pollutants in our surface water streams. And these are permits that are mandated by state and federal regulations, and they are part of the Clean Water Act. And it's really nice to be able to partner on this because it's such a large jurisdiction, and we each can play different roles. Through MTSU, primarily we help with the public participation and the education in our community, and trying to discover where pollutants might be coming from and how to prevent them. In talking about that, there are 6 areas that we typically focus on in the stormwater program, and that is the public education, public participation, preventing pollution through reducing discharges, determining where those are and trying to eliminate the sources. And then the city focuses on the pre and post construction mechanisms, and we both do good housekeeping through different ways our facilities contribute to try and reduce pollution. A little bit about what an MS4 is. It's a municipal separate storm sewer system, and that's basically just the difference between a storm sewer system and the sanitary sewer system is the sanitary sewer is discharged to a facility through the pipes, and then it's cleaned up before it's entered back into the rivers and streams. But in the storm sewer system, that discharges directly to the stream without being cleaned up. So when we can try and keep as much pollution reduced, then we have cleaner rivers and streams. So a good saying that we use in the industry is only rain down the storm drain. And most people have seen these watershed signs. This is a public awareness campaign that the Department of Transportation had done several years ago. MTSU was doing education for stormwater for a long time before we got our current program. And one of the early things we did was work with TDOT and TDEC on this brochure series that had an educational component to these billboards that you see around the state. And it's called A Guide to Traveling Tennessee's Watersheds, and you can find it online at that link at the bottom. And it just shares a little bit about what a watershed is and some of our big basins across the state, and understanding some really neat watersheds across the state in a print format. For those of you who don't know what a watershed is, a good way to remember it, it is water that sheds from land. So anywhere that water drains off of a land source and goes to the lowest point by gravity, that's a watershed. And watersheds are various sizes. And the biggest thing that we need to let people know is that as it travels through that watershed, usually the pollutants are accumulated and they increase as they move downstream. So a lot of times your upper headwater streams usually are cleaner, and if we can keep those cleaner, we can reduce pollution there. But also a lot of these have really important ecosystems for the species that live there. And so our tributaries and our smaller streams are really important as part of our watershed protection efforts. And a description of this is understanding the biodiversity across the United States and where some of the highly dense biodiverse regions are. And the southeast region, as you can see on this image, are home to so many important species. 2/3 of the fish species are found here in the southeast. Almost half of the turtle species are found here. Almost all of the salamander species are found in the southeast, as well as the mussels and the crayfish. So when we have a lot of these water pollutant issues, we lose so many of these critical species. And that's one of the other reasons why we try and promote water quality and good stream health, so we can protect these really neat biodiverse areas. And most of these species, as this chart shows, they don't live anywhere else. They're just found in this region. And so when we lose a species, it can be pretty critical for that type of an animal. Also, one of the things I want to show is this is where we're having such high dense development coming in. So it's the crossover between our protection of our species, and especially in these increasingly urban areas where this crossover is where we're losing some of these species. These are just some of the watersheds across the state in the county, kind of listed by county. Tennessee has 55 recognized watersheds. Of the streams in Tennessee, we have 60,000 miles of rivers and streams. And as this slide shows, 30% do not meet the needs for fish and aquatic life. And so that's quite a considerable number. 43% is for recreation. So as we get in summertime and we realize the multiple uses for our rivers and streams, such as irrigation and drinking water supply and recreation and aquatic life, the different types of pollution can contribute to how we use these streams and whether or not it meets that intended use. And the way the water quality kind of breaks out are in these different categories. For some of the issues that we see, habitat alteration is a big one. So is pathogens and silt and nutrients. These are our largest categories of pollutant and water quality issues. Habitat alteration is like removing the buffers around our streams and cutting down a lot of those really important riparian areas that protect water quality and add habitat. Pathogens we're seeing in some of our local streams even. Some of these can be contributed by septic influences. Some of the septic systems that are older can contribute if they're not maintained, or pipes from our sewer lines that break. Sometimes just our dog waste, or cattle farms, or different agriculture can contribute to the pathogens. Also the nutrient levels, even at home with the way we apply fertilizer and chemicals to our yards can contribute. And siltation, that's just sediment from erosion or runoff that has a lot of sediment in our streams. Some of the others are pesticide, metals from brake dust on roads, or just other industrial factors. But that's kind of a breakdown of some of the categories of water quality issues that we see. This is where we are, of course. We're in Middle Tennessee. Everybody probably already knows that. And ours is the Stones River watershed. We're also within the Central Basin. The Stones River shed is one of 14 that drain into the Cumberland River Basin. That's a larger category of watershed. And that's where Percy Priest is located. So most people know. And this is kind of just an image of as the Stones River flows downstream and flows into the Cumberland River, this is a larger watershed and an image of that. Our watershed facts include various species of interest that are found here, from plants and animals that don't live anywhere else. 26 mussels are found here, 3 of which are really rare that aren't found in very many other places. Crayfish that live here, and amphibians. And as our watershed gets more and more developed, this is where we're trying to promote understanding of why we want to have smart growth habits so that we can continue to protect these species. This is just some of the land size. We've got 921 square miles, over 1,000 stream miles, 22,000 plus lake acres. And if you've never visited the state natural areas, there are 12 designated state natural areas that can be found on TDEC's website, or just Googling the state natural areas, and there are 12 found in our watershed, which is pretty interesting. We've got some really unique natural areas here that if you haven't already visited, you might want to. Again, we said we were in the Central Basin, and this is a really important feature of how water acts in our area and how we can have contributing factors for pollution and connecting the surface to underground, and a chance for those pollutants to be carried through our karst and cave systems. Talking about caves, this is a breakdown in Tennessee of caves by county, and in Rutherford, this was as of 2011, they had listed 129 caves in our county. Some of these are really unique cave systems, like our snail shell cave, that are very unique ecosystems too. So we want to protect those features when we can, especially the really critical areas that are very unique to our region. Excuse me, this is a good example of the karst features and the geology and how water can sink below ground and also rise out of our springs. Some of examples of what a difference of a sinkhole and a karst window are, and how as bedrock starts to collapse in our ground, then our sinkholes can open up, and just what some of the different topics are. Because our water gradient is so low in the watershed, a lot of times our surface water and our underground can be very close together. And then when water flows over the karst bedrock, it can often sink and then come out in an underlying rock unit. And that's those surface and underground and where your water levels are of a really important feature, especially in our watershed and in karst systems, that we like people to know. Here's another good example of what that looks like, especially this you'll see along the Cumberland features. But you can see how a lot of times you can have losing and gaining streams, and where our dumping is, and how that can contribute to groundwater pollution and later surface water connections, because these are so tied together often. These are some pictures of some of the karst features in our local watershed. Really beautiful rock formations. This is a great indicator too of a disappearing stream, and then a spring as it comes out below. So you can see how a lot of times your water pollution can carry because it can't be treated through that bedrock. So a lot of times dye tracing is done in our community to find where our sinkholes are traveling to, and this helps us to identify the surface and underground connections. We've got some great people here in the community. Dr. Ogden and Josh Upham have done some really neat dye tracing, and we've got some good maps that identify those connections between our sinkholes and our streams. This is some examples of losing and gaining stream, where a lot of times a gaining stream would be one that emerges from a spring, and a losing would be where it sinks into a sinkhole and disappear. A lot of times our river systems in the summer months, we can lose those as our water flow travels down into sinkholes and can't maintain the flow. A lot of times our ditches look like just ditches, but there's features that can identify those as streams if you have 2 or more of different kinds of indicator species. And so a lot of times it's determined by the vegetation or the species that you would find living there. And these are really important, especially for our salamander species and the breeding grounds for those, especially in our cool winter months. Those are, they don't look like they would be a stream, so a lot of times people don't think about protecting these features, but in many times these are breeding grounds for some of our really important amphibian species. Here's a map of some of those dye traces and where some of the sinks are and where they lose and go below ground and then come out, and what some of the groundwater dye traces kind of show. This is from some of the research that's gone on. Just out of curiosity, I wanted to include that. Watersheds, as we described earlier, the Stones River watershed is a smaller watershed. It's a Huck 8 versus the Cumberland River watershed. Some of our smaller, even smaller subwatersheds that we go around the community and do programs in and do different research and projects are our subwatersheds at a Huck 12 level. So the smaller the watershed, the larger the number. And this just is a map of some of these watersheds throughout Murfreesboro and kind of how we break our community down as we do different projects. And each of these have unique features, and we'll walk through some of these. Overall Creek has a lot of karst features. Most of the water quality protection zones were in place in 2010 before a lot of the major development occurred, and so that helped us to keep water quality good in those areas. Anytime we can keep the buffers around our streams and our sinkholes, then we can protect water quality. In Overall Creek, we see a lot of streams like gaining and losing, and our water flow changing through these karst features. Some of the smaller tributaries include Puckett Creek and Armstrong Branch and Rucker Spring, if you recognize those. Here's another picture at Puckett Creek. LYTLE Creek is another of our subwatersheds. Most people know that, where it's located at Discovery Center, and it flows through town, through Cannonsburg to the Greenway at Old Fort Park. A lot of these are impaired streams where our water quality is low and we've got some pathogens. We look for macroinvertebrates to test the health of those streams. And most of these pollutants are from urban pollution and potentially some septic issues contributing to our pathogens. Black Fox Spring is a really historic kind of area also, and Murphy Spring, and then it goes through Town Creek. Here's what it looks like at Old Fort Park. Most of you know this region from the Greenway. West Fork also has a lot of our karst regions. I'm going to go back one slide. At Old Fort Park, on the south side of this, it's mostly bedrock. And then that bedrock starts to break on the northern side. And that's a good location of where we start to see a shift in the geology and in the bottom of our stream bed. And that's a really neat feature as we go across the city and we see how our streams change over time as this bedrock breaks down, and it changes our stream beds. Here is the West Fork again and some of the karst features found in there, and you can see how big some of these features can be. This is a smaller opening, but you can see how this would contribute to surface and groundwater connections very easily. West Fork, where it dries up. This is an area on the north side of town where the tornado had come through and had changed and altered a bunch of the habitat beside the stream. Much of this has started to grow up. But this is a really good picture to show too how a lot of times we can lose our upper canopy. And when that happens, you can have a lot of the invasive shrubs like privet come in and can overtake an area rather quickly. And so part of the city's programs is trying to help homeowners that live beside streams have really good native species that they can put back. And we just try and make available a variety of species to help keep a really healthy riparian system and the buffer system beside the river. The East Fork, a lot of this is on Las Casas, down from the Krogers, or actually up from the Krogers, and Bear Branch, Garrison Creek, Bushman Creek, Wade's Branch, and Dry Branch are all some streams within this subwatershed. This is where we also get our water intake from. We do see some urban pollution and some agriculture pollution. We also see a lot of habitat being altered, and in this case, they did not have a stream riparian buffer very well, and a lot of this algae was coming in, and we planted a bunch of trees that we'll see some pictures later of where we tried to establish this, and then we noticed how a lot of the numbers improved for the water quality on this stream as well. Brown's Mill is also on the East Fork, and several years ago we removed some of the pieces of that dilapidated mill that were within the river. That was in partnership with the City of Murfreesboro, the Stones River Watershed, TWRA, and just many other partners that came together to try and remove those segments of that old dam that were dangerous, where they had exposed rebar and where it had restricted the natural flow of the river, and that opening up that channel to flow without any barriers really helped a lot of the species in that area to come back and thrive. The Middle Fork is has a lot of our urban and industrial pollution contributions. We've got some golf courses in that area. In a lot of these we have good water quality, but we do always see pollution within a city, so we're always working to keep those pollution levels down. The way we monitor our streams is by checking the biological species that live in the stream. This is an example of how we do that, and some of the species and water quality parameters and turbidity testing that tells us how much sediment is in the water. There's a few species and how they're looking and counting some of those numbers. And what they're counting are these bugs, these aquatic bugs that live in the stream beds. And there's a way you can score your streams that tell you how healthy your stream is by the quantity and the variety of species that you find. And this is just a map of some of those numbers. And we track this, and we do projects on a lot of these streams that have lower numbers to try and get those increased and improve the health of that stream. And some of these are a picture of the different varieties of species that we're looking at and how we identify those and why. On the top, you can see these are clean water species that they are not very resilient to pollution. So as pollution is increased in the waters, their numbers decline. So if you're seeing a lot of these species like your stoneflies, maneflies, caddisflies, these will tell you that your health of your river is pretty good, or else they wouldn't be able to survive. Some of your species at the bottom are mosquito species, leeches. Some of those are so hardy that they will thrive in polluted water. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see these nuisance animals like your mosquitoes and that can live without a lot of aeration, and they can live in polluted water. So if you have a lot of your species at the top, they can keep these numbers down. And that's why we want to see the diversity again of the species. And then the more diverse of these kind of smaller macroinvertebrates, that's what our fish species, our turtle species, and different birds, what they feed off of. So if we lose these species, we'll lose some of our other species as well. And that's how the whole ecosystem ties together and why it's dependent on water quality. So these bioindicators are called macroinvertebrates or benthic bugs, and macro means you can see them with your eye, and benthic means they live on the bottom of these stream beds. Here's a spring branch, Fort Park. It doesn't really look like it's a spring, it kind of looks like it's a little ditch, but there's a lot of life that lives in that, and then it feeds into LYTLE Creek. And again, these are dependent on the substrate material or what's found on the bottom of the stream bed. Also the organic material, which is why it's so important to have a healthy riparian habitat and a diverse amount of plant species that are found there so that the variety of these bugs can live. Also the water quality, of course. But it's the combination of all these that come together that give us the diversity of these bugs, which are what feeds the other species. Like our amphibians and frogs, turtles, birds. Here's an example of a really diverse and healthy riparian system. The littoral zone is where these interface with the water table. And so these are a lot of times your breeding grounds. They also, your emergent and your riparian, that's where your grasses and some of your low shrubs have really deep roots that can help to hold and stabilize that soil. But they're also a lot of times the habitat that's needed for these species. And then your upland is where you'll want to find a lot of your tree species and your upper canopy that helps shade that river system and keep the temperatures cooler for these animals to thrive. Here's a picture of some of the dye tracing that we talked about. That's Dr. Ogden down on the left. Some of the cleanup efforts that we've done. We get a lot of the students over at MTSU, a lot of high school students contributing for their volunteer hours that they need for the different organizations they're involved with. Also along the cleanup, the Murfreesboro Parks is starting a new program during this pandemic where people can do their individual cleanups and post their pictures under Guardians of the Greenway, and Conservation in Action. With those hashtag signs, you can kind of share the cleanups that you're doing on your own since we can't gather in large groups right now. And you can find more about that on Murfreesboro Parks and Rec page and how to still be involved while we're all trying to social distance right now. This is why it's so important, is there's so much dumping that goes on a lot of times in remote areas, and why we really do need the help of citizens as part of this process and identifying. Also, the city cleans out the storm drains with some of the features down on the left where they help to remove sediment and other things from the clogged drains. Many times we go into classroom as part of our education and we do hands-on activities with the kids. We do a lot of stream plantings in the stream planting projects. This is where we'll either give homeowners that live beside a stream various plants that are native to help build up and restore. This is an example of like how you could visualize trying to plant an area that did not have a healthy riparian area, and how you could kind of do a schematic of your plantings to help that get restored with good canopy and a variety of species. This is actually what we did beside Garrison Creek on South Rutherford, over by that Kroger's at Las Casas. We didn't have a riparian area at all there, and we were having very low numbers. And then we've planted multiple trees with students. This is another picture of that, where we got trees donated. All of these trees, or for the most part, were free, or we worked with partners on getting these, and then we had students help us put these in beside the river. This was from 2011, 2012 up to about 2019. We did multiple plantings and monitoring. And this is an example of how in just a very quick time that was restored. And the numbers started to reflect that too. In 2014, the number, you could see where they do the count of the biological species, was only 14. And by 2017, 3 years later, you can see that that number 32, that's considered high. So just as simple as planting trees can just make drastic differences in the health and the quality of the water and the species that live there. So again, we started planting this area in 2011, 2012. So by 5 years, we had just a drastic change in the quality of that stream. Some other events we like to do in the watershed is getting people out. The city does Boat Day, which unfortunately has been canceled this year, but we teach safe recreation. And then we usually are at Earth Day, which was also unfortunately canceled, but we try and do community events. So hopefully you've seen us at some of these, and we'll watch for us at future events as well. We've taken kids and adults on field trips to the workshops, and we get them in the stream doing some of this testing and looking for the bugs. This is an example of a rain barrel workshop and some other farmers market workshops that we've done for community education. We have conducted quite a bit of business outreach and trying to show how businesses can help with this, and how maintaining their site helps to reduce runoff problems from these surface. Anywhere the water and rain hits a paved surface, it flows into the storm drain. So you can see how just maintaining the paved areas around businesses can help us keep these water quality in the streams nearest to them clean. We do a lot of residential outreach where we tell citizens about our tree days and also how to keep their yard waste maintained to protect the storm drains. A lot of these can contribute to the high nutrients, and it can also clog and cause flooding. This was an example of our 2014 tree day. We usually give away these trees. We send letters to citizens, and then we follow up with them and hand out trees. In 2014, we did 137 letters and handed out 1,100 trees to citizens. And this year we've just been wrapping up that as well. And I think we had about 650 or 700 trees that were given away to citizens. And this is where we really target homeowners that live beside streams and trying to encourage healthy stream plantings. Here's my contact information. I know I'm available anytime if you want to reach out. Just a reminder, I'm with MTSU, the Stormwater Program. You can find me there. I'm also with the Stones River Watershed Association. So if you don't know about that organization, I encourage you to look up that and become involved. But thank you guys so much for watching this, and hope to see you at an event soon.